Now, music is one of the most important aspects of a video game to me. When I saw the trailers for Breath of the Wild, I thought it was some of the most incredible music I'd ever heard. It just so perfectly captured the emotions it needed to, and made it feel like the music was in charge of the situation. I still to this day believe that the Breath of the Wild trailers are some of the best game trailers in the industry, but that doesn't mean it's reflective of what to actually expect from the game. I went into this game believing it would have one of the greatest game OSTs I'd ever listened to if it was anything close to the trailers, but it really wasn't even slightly close to the trailers. Before we hop into the music though, let's establish player engagement in video games. This is going to be a long tangent on game design, but believe me, I will relate it back to music and mostly the title screen, so bear with me here, and hey, you may learn something along the way. Consider the following. Most players of a game will not even finish the game after starting. This is a common occurrence for almost any video game. Let's look at Assassin's Creed Odyssey for an example, which has an achievement for finishing each of the 9 chapters of the game. The following statistics can be obtained from the Steam achievements for the PC version of the game. By the end of the first chapter of the game, you've already lost about a quarter of your player base. By the end, you've lost over 65% of those who first started. Heck, there's even an achievement called This Is Sparta in the game, which you automatically receive for completing the combat tutorial at the beginning of the game. Know how many players got that achievement? 91.1%. That means that before the first combat tutorial is even finished, nearly 10% of players already decided it wasn't worth their time. Either the game just isn't worthwhile, or maybe they'll just play it one day when they have the time, and keep telling themselves that for the next several years as the game sits untouched. Holy gosh, losing 10% of players right at the very beginning, another 15 more before the end of the first chapter, and 65% total of players by the end? Does this just mean that Assassin's Creed Odyssey is a really bad game? No, actually, it doesn't. I can't speak to the quality of the game because I haven't actually played it yet. The Assassin's Creed series is in progress on my channel, so I'll get to it eventually, but my professor in my use of history and video games class spoke pretty highly of it, so I trust it must be pretty good. It's actually pretty standard for any game to lose most of their player base before the end. Heck, Assassin's Creed Odyssey's 34.1% is actually pretty impressive in terms of how many people stuck it out. Or take one of my favorite games of all time, which you should totally play yourself if you haven't already, it's only like 10 bucks on Steam, called Rakuen. It's developed by the same person who did the music for Plants vs. Zombies, Laura Shigihara, and is a completely story and music-based adventure about a boy in a hospital who works towards learning the backstories of his fellow hospital mates and helping to bring them closure, and it's honestly one of the few games that's made me cry. It's one of my very favorite games, and it's only 6 to 7 hours long. Wanna know how many people finished that one? 25.4% of players. By the end, you've lost 3/4 of your players. Or take another example, this one with multiple endings, Fallout New Vegas. There are 4 endings to this game, each one with an associated achievement. These 4 ending achievements are Eureka, All or Nothing, Veni Vidi Vici, and No Gods, No Masters. The percentage of players that earned each of these achievements is 6.9%, 5%, 3.6%, and 11%. If you make the rash assumption that not a single one of those players went for multiple of those achievements, that everybody only got one ending and called it a day, that means you have a maximum of 26.5% of your players to actually beat the game. Considering how silly it is to believe nobody would go for multiple endings, it's a safe assumption to say that in Fallout New Vegas, you have over 3/4 of your player base quit before making it to the end. Like I said, this is actually pretty normal for any video game, so games like Assassin's Creed Odyssey with 34.1% of players being engaged enough to make it to the end for an open world game, as long as I hear that one is, really is above average. Good on them for making a game that continues to engage you as it goes on. I'll play it one day. Or take another above average example of a game that made an engaging plot that made players want to see resolved, The Walking Dead, the first season. 40% of players made it to the end of this adventure, which really is impressive, I'd say. Sure, you can look at things like The Walking Dead: A New Frontier, with 65.3% of players making it to the end, but you also have to consider that not many people are going to be hopping into the 3rd game in this series of 4, instead of the first one, and it had nowhere near as big of an impact on the gaming industry as the first season of The Walking Dead did. That game really was the talk of the town when it made a splash. So most of the players hopping into this game, I'd wager, were already in it for the long haul with the series in general. Video games really are one of the most interesting facets for storytelling. No other medium draws players in to play as much of a part in the story themselves as in the cases of books or movies or such, and it is a medium where we can see statistics like this that actually shows how many made it all the way to the end. The fact of the matter is, for most games, most players won't make it to the end. And as you can see with statistics such as completed chapters in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, you really are losing players across the entire course of a game. This is why it's important to constantly have systems in place to engage the player, and if the game has to go through a dull moment for one reason or another, to have something that pulls the player's attention back soon after, to lose as few players as possible along the way. A brilliant example of this is in Left 4 Dead 2, which is a game with AI I highly recommend looking into if you're interested in video game AI design. Left 4 Dead 2 strives to continue to foster player engagement by generating dramatic game pacing. If combat is constant, then the game just gets stressful and fatiguing, you burn out so fast. But if the game has long periods of inactivity, then it's just boring. So what the algorithm does is it estimates the emotional intensity of each survivor and sums it up to obtain the max survivor intensity. Survivor intensity will increase when a survivor is injured or incapacitated or such, and survivor intensity decays when infected or killed. At least that's the simple version. It then uses the sum of the survivor intensity to determine how the game will go. If the emotional intensity is determined to be too high, the game will give players a break for a while by removing major threats. Otherwise, if the emotional intensity is not yet at that threshold, populate the area with enemies. In this way, the calculated player/survivor emotional intensity is what modulates the infected population and creates a system that serves to engage the player while avoiding burnout or boredom in the process. It is very important in game design to implement strategies into player engagement for this same purpose, keeping up the percentage of those who actually make it all the way to the end of your game as much as you can. What does this have to do with music though? Or as I mentioned before this little lesson on game design, the title screen. Well, music is one of the key factors in building the world around you and helping to build an engaging experience, whether it be having an incredible environment with beautiful music to accompany it that makes you say, wow, this is absolutely incredible. I can't wait to see what this game throws at me next. Or some absolutely epic battle music that makes you say, well, it actually makes you too stunned with how epic it is to say anything, honestly. Or whether it's a kick-ass trailer theme that makes you say, I need to play this game. Music is one of the most useful tools for player engagement, and one of the most important places to showcase music is on the title screen. Why? Remember how Assassin's Creed Odyssey lost 10% of its player base before even completing the combat tutorial? Or let's look at Fallout New Vegas again, for example. 7% of players gone before even creating their character at the very beginning of the game. And over 50% of players gone before even completing the unskippable tutorial quest at the beginning of the game. The first impression a game makes on a player is the most important, because it's what determines whether the player decides the game is worth their time, or whether they just wasted their money and should now collect dust or be sold off, or be put on the back burner basically forever. After the combat tutorial for Assassin's Creed Odyssey, you've got 90% of players left you've got to convince to stick around, and by the end you've got 35% of players left to convince to stick around. So the earlier on it is, the more important engagement becomes, because that's when you have the most attention. You want your viewership/player base to lessen as little as possible as it goes on. Like, I'm sure I'm not doing a good job with that in this music discussion by talking for so long about something that isn't music. You need to convince players early on that this is an adventure worth sticking out. Take Xenoblade Chronicles 2 for example. Spoilers for the first chapter of that game. The game's opening chapter takes time to introduce several of the main characters that will be seen throughout the plot, and then it's like, you've got that, right? Great! The game then proceeds to kill off the protagonist, Rex, after being betrayed by Owl the Edge, who stabs him through the heart, only for Rex to be revived by the being that the bad dudes deceived him into salvaging for them, Pyra, the Aegis, and fighting them off together before escaping, in some of the best cutscenes I've ever seen in video games. This is probably the greatest introduction chapter I have ever seen in any video game. It really makes you go, holy shit, if that's chapter 1, then what's the rest of the game gonna be like? It takes the time to establish the world, the characters, the antagonists, and the conflict, and throw you right into the heat of the drama of a level that most games would reserve for a latter part of their plot. That initial hook really sets the tone for the rest of the adventure, making your introduction to a story absolutely vital. Some movies portray this exceptionally as well, How to Train Your Dragon being an excellent example, by establishing all the main characters in the first scene, as well as most of the musical themes that are then used throughout the trilogy. I would highly recommend checking out other videos that cover the topic of How to Train Your Dragon's intro. YouTubers know the importance of constant engagement when it comes to their videos, as well as the importance of having a hook right at the beginning of their videos to give their viewers a reason to stay. You've been hacked! People really can click off a video at any time, so you need to make sure you don't have dull moments for too long. Hey, I see you. Stay away from that XOK. Don't hit it. Keep watching the video. Even when trying your best though, there will always be times that people click off. Almost everybody who clicks a video won't make it to the end, similar to video games. YouTubers who understand the platform and the importance of having a hook at the beginning will always start out strong. Throw what's best at the viewer first before getting into the story of the video. This is exactly what Xenoblade Chronicles 2 does through its intro. It throws you right into scenes so spicy it feels like it could be the epic finale to countless other games. Or take Astral Chain for example. It establishes some characters and rules of the world, and then the moment you meet your actual character, it transitions from cutscene to gameplay, and you're like, wait, it's gameplay right now? As you're on your way to kick the ass of some baddies before you even know any of the controls. A game has two main first impression opportunities. The title screen, followed by the first chapter, the first episode, the tutorials, or whatever you want to call the opening. In the case of Assassin's Creed Odyssey, this is where nearly 10% and then 25% total of their player base was already lost. So it is vital to have a title screen and an opening sequence that serve to prove to the player that this is an experience worth their time, so as to reduce as much as possible how many players drop the game early on. The opening sequence is where you establish the characters, the setting and the world, the gameplay, but the title screen is where you set the tone. We'll be talking about the opening sequence later in this discussion during the gameplay section. But what is it that the title screen shows, and what feelings does the title screen music evoke in the player? Let's look at some title screen examples with what tones they set. Octopath Traveler is a game based around classic RPGs with elements of modern gaming mixed in, so it sports a title screen that aims to fit the tone of let's go on an adventure in classic RPG fashion tone-wise, while still feeling like something fresh and new. Astral Chain, despite it having incredibly epic and fast-paced gameplay, the title screen is much more ominous. There is a bustling city in the distance, but the bridge nearby is damaged, and the walls around the outside do make it feel post-apocalyptic. There's a gentle breeze, calm for now, but ominous sounds that signify there is something much more looming going on here. Assassin's Creed Revelations was the final game in the Ezio trilogy, and through its title screen, it sets the tone that this is the end of an era. Or take what I would argue is the best example of a title screen, Xenoblade Chronicles. All before even advancing past the very first menu, Xenoblade Chronicles already takes you on an entire musical journey that serves to portray the adventure and tale this piece of art has to share with you. This is the power a title screen has the potential to have, to set the tone and feel of the experience about to be had, to invoke feelings of how one should view this world, to take you on a complete musical journey that symbolically represents a story one is about to experience, or countless other possibilities. It truly is an understatement to say that the title screen is of little to no importance to a video game. So, what kind of music does Breath of the Wild showcase on its title screen, and what kind of tone does it set? It's not muted, don't worry. That's literally it. Are you kidding me? A title screen has the power to draw emotions out of the player before the adventure has even started when done properly, but the only feelings Breath of the Wild's title screen really draws out is, this is a legit copy of the game, right? This isn't like some bootlegged version or something? I knew I shouldn't have gone for a used copy. I swear, this literally does feel like the title screen somebody trying to rip off a game would make. Here's all the options over here. I want to put in the background though. Guess I'll just slap on some official art I can find on Google and make a slideshow or some shit. This is such a missed opportunity. This is supposed to be your opportunity to prove to the player that this is an experience worth their money, that they're about to be in for a grand adventure, not, here's some pretty pictures, go fuck yourself, I don't care you paid for my game. They could have literally thrown anything over the title screen, anything to make it not just be silence. They could have included one of the trailer themes, which would then have it actually make sense when the trailer leitmotifs are used here and there in the game. The leitmotif being a recurring tune used throughout the adventure, typically used in different parts of the OST to draw emotions out of the player. We'll come back to leitmotifs later though. I know what you might be thinking. Man, this annoying guy just went on and on to make a point that the title screen is shit. First of all, it's my video. Second of all, I want videos like these to also be educational, to really give you insight into how much of an impact something like a title screen has on something as important as viewer engagement. Sure, it may be a video on Breath of the Wild, but I hope it teaches lessons along the way that can be applied into how one views games in general. I really want to get into why it is I view things the way I do, and help you be able to keep concepts such as these at the back of your mind to be able to use in your own critiques of media in general. I wanted to teach lessons along the way, not just say, title screen is shit. I could have done that easily if that's all I wanted to do. So even if you disagree with my opinions throughout this discussion, I hope that there's still something that you can take away from this video. Maybe a new insight or lens with which to view media, or perhaps a greater appreciation for how much depth video games really do have behind them from a design standpoint. Even if you think all of my opinions are terrible and I suck because I slandered your favorite game or some such, I hope there's still something that you can take away from this discussion. Alright, let's hop into the music properly. Now, this is where this section stops being as factual and backed by evidence, and becomes more of my opinion. If my opinion offends you, just remember that it's my opinion, you're free to enjoy whatever you like. Don't get riled up by one guy making a video. Let's start with the overworld themes. While previous Zelda games have boasted active soundtracks that really build up the adventure ahead, Breath of the Wild takes a step back and lets the world take over. For some people, this is enjoyable, but the way I see it, I believe the soundtrack should serve to build the world around you and complement the gameplay in this way, rather than saying to the gameplay and world, I'm gonna go take a smoke, you're in charge. The overworld music steps so far away that you've typically only got some notes every couple seconds, which I personally feel is too far of a step back. To me, it sounds like somebody playing piano for the first time. Maybe some instructions in front of them like, here's some notes you could play together to sound nice, and they do them one at a time as they're getting used to the keys. Let's get this straight. My problem with the soundtrack is not that it isn't in the style of classic Zelda games, where it's in your face and adventurous, maybe even intense in some cases. In fact, I feel like that style of music really wouldn't work here. It worked for small environments of a linear story you're racing across the field in, but really wouldn't work in a game where you're just fucking around, maybe sneaking into a camp here or there, running from some bees, hunting or foraging the surroundings, cooking with Chef Link, or trying to launch yourself at a tree or something. At least the music department had the nerve to make changes to accommodate for the new open world style more than the writing department did, I'd argue. I think going for atmospheric was a good idea, I just don't think it was handled as well as it could be, especially considering it's a musical field which hasn't been explored to this extent in the series before. Atmospheric doesn't mean that the music has to be next to non-existent, that it has to feel like it's not even there. I feel like in the Breath of the Wild soundtrack argument, a lot of people look at the atmospheric style that Breath of the Wild went for, and the more in-your-face active music of past Zelda games, and feel like there's no in-between, that those who don't like Breath of the Wild soundtrack are just pissy that it's not like previous Zelda titles. In my eyes, atmospheric does not mean inactive music. I feel like the best atmosphere is made when the soundtrack exists to complement the tone the gameplay wants to set by adding to it, rather than deciding to largely sit this one out. The best atmospheric soundtrack is one where you can imagine an area without needing to physically see the environment at all, having the music be relaxing but still powerful enough to paint a picture for you all on its own. One could argue Breath of the Wild's soundtrack paints this kind of picture, and sure, I can see it, but I just find it harder to be able to draw meaning out of music when it's barely there, and is created in such a way that it's meant to rely on the gameplay in front of you to be almost fully in charge of painting that picture. I know there's more to this soundtrack than meets the eye, go see 8-Bit Music Theory for that, but it's something I can't find myself getting behind when I don't feel like the gameplay and the music are on equal footing with one another. I feel like the gameplay and the music should go hand in hand, both playing an equal part in creating the environment not only with the player's eyes, but with their ears as well, rather than leaving one to completely take over while the other adds tiny bits and pieces here and there. Sure, it's technically atmospheric, and I can see how this can be found as relaxing, but I can't help but feel like it's just the easy way out of creating a soundtrack that builds the world mentally as much as the gameplay does physically. For the battle themes, I just kind of felt like they were par. They fit what they had to, but didn't really do anything else, never stood out in any way, and were never really all that memorable. Sometimes there were parts that were good, like take the Talus theme for example. It has like 2 seconds that are actually so good and so catchy, and then the rest is just par. Just because it has this catchy 2-second bit you hear every once in a while, doesn't make the entire thing good. Man, how I wish the whole thing is as catchy as those 2 seconds. I feel like there are those out there who name themes like this incredible because of only a very small part of it, which I personally don't feel like is fair to say. This battle theme, for the most part, I feel just fits what it's supposed to, but doesn't go any further. For a theme that does really crank it up though, the Guardian Battle theme. For the tone that it has to set when it comes on in game, it just perfectly matches what it needs to. Sure, themes like the Talus battle are fitting for fighting a stone monster guy, but I feel like the Guardian theme really just strikes what it really needs to a T. Not only does it sound right for the circumstance, but it also captures you emotionally with the feeling of, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. It's something for you to hear come on in the middle of gameplay to strike sudden panic into your heart, and I feel like it nails it. Guardian battle theme aside, the battle music all felt kind of samey to me, all just kind of being par where it's like, this is good enough. Or music where there is stuff of note, like the few seconds in the Talus battle theme, but is just surrounded with so much filler that it doesn't even matter. Or take the Molduga battle theme for example. It picks up to actually be pretty spicy, but only for certain parts of the fight, which you may only just barely even be able to enjoy depending on how the fight goes. So even though there is parts that do get spicy, you wind up mostly sitting through samey, fillery sounding music for the majority of the fight. I feel like the battle themes all just kind of blend together in this way, and serve to really undershadow the parts that are actually good, like Talus getting catchy as heck for like 2 seconds, or Molduga getting super spicy, because it's too surrounded by pure filler that's just good enough, instead of taking the music further, or at least having a focus on what does go above par, I'd argue. You can tell they know how to write music well, but it felt like for this game they just didn't have the confidence to focus on the parts that could have really made the music stand out, instead just settling for what was good enough. Some of the musical choices really confused me though, with some additions that seemed like just the most pointless things ever. The Shrine Battle theme, for example. On paper, it seems kind of like the others where it's just par and good enough, but listen closely to the instruments in the background instead of what's in the foreground. There's literally a boing sound. Why is this here? What purpose does it serve? There's a killer robot trying to murderize you. You know what would be a fitting accompanying sound for this situation? How about a subtle little boing in the background? It honestly sounds kind of like something someone snuck in to see if any of their coworkers would actually notice, or somebody on the team got wronged in some way, so they snuck in a random boing sound into just about the most unfitting place for a boing sound. I feel like some parts of the musical team were out there giving their best effort at making masterful music, and some other parts were just smoking something really serious. Like, I imagine for the Talus battle theme, somebody threw together the really catchy 2 seconds and was like, hey, I spent a while coming up with this really catchy tune. I think it would make a really awesome battle theme if something was crafted around this tune. And somebody else was like, ugh, that sounds like effort. Let's not focus on that part and just make some generic sounding music. Seriously, the really catchy part and the rest of the Talus theme don't play off of each other in any way. It just sounds like they were made by different people with different goals in mind or something. I feel like a lot of the problems I have with the game is various aspects of the game feel like they're fighting other aspects, or even themselves. For the town themes, generally I feel like they're pretty alright, mostly. For Kakariko Village, I feel like it could be more toned down and relaxing. Sometimes to me it felt a little obnoxious, or like I should expect some shit to go down real fast in the village. Goron City fits what it has to, and that's it really. Just kind of par gets the job done, I suppose. Rito Village though, whoo boy. When a game is able to really nail a soundtrack, it will often use leitmotifs throughout the adventure, using the same tune in different styles to evoke certain emotions in the player, oftentimes being that feeling that this is similar to what you once knew, but it is now somehow different since it's done in a different style with a different tone, with a different setting. Breath of the Wild in this case, however, was like, leitmotifs from this adventure? Nah bro, how about a leitmotif from a different adventure? The leitmotif I mean, well, at least the one I'm currently talking about in this theme, there's technically another one too in the intro of this piece, is the Dragon Roost Island theme from The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. To those who've played Wind Waker, instead of evoking that this adventure has changed by using a leitmotif from earlier in this adventure, it evokes nostalgia for an adventure long past, and the feeling, times have changed, this is a new journey now, a new era. It really is, frankly, a brilliant use of a leitmotif, by drawing parallels back to a completely different past adventure, and overall I feel like it's just a fitting and relaxing theme in general. Zora's Domain does something similar by taking inspiration from Ocarina of Time Zora's Domain, while being overall pretty relaxing and fitting a watery area. If I'm just listening to the music and imagining the environment though, I would imagine a slightly more wintry one, like an area that's a mix of ice and water, which I attribute to the bells in the background. Bells are typically symbolic of wintry areas, so I'm not exactly sure why this was put in here. It feels kinda like the Shrine Battle boing sound, where it's like even it doesn't know what it's doing there. Unlike the boing sound though, I feel like it does actually help contribute to this piece's relaxingness, but it builds a picture of a slightly wrong environment. It sounds like something I'd listen to as I trek around a partially frozen river and waterfall system or something. So I feel like the choice of bells in the background might be a little misplaced, but otherwise I generally feel like this is a pretty good theme, and could potentially be really relaxing. This sounds like the kind of thing you could expect in a lo-fi remix. For some other town themes, Lurelin Village is pretty decent honestly. Maybe not the best seaside town I've ever heard, but it gets the job done, and not half bad at being relaxing either. I feel like probably my favorite original town theme is Hateno Village. By original, I mean something newly introduced in this world, unlike something like the Rito or Zora's areas, where they could play off of themes established in previous games. So by original, I mean something that they had to start from scratch from musically. This is one of the themes of the game that not only fits what it has to, but goes beyond just that to create something genuinely enjoyable to listen to. I feel like too much of the soundtrack settle for just being good enough, instead of trying to really excel in their fields. I feel like themes like Hateno Village, Rito Village, or Zora's Domain have been able to mostly achieve excelling in their fields though. Zora's slightly off environment building does bug me a little bit though. Alright, character themes. Let's take a look at the champions. Urbosa was one of those themes that just kind of felt like it fit what it had to, and they've settled on that. Revali's theme wasn't half bad as a theme, and I'll come back to it when we talk about leitmotifs later. As a character theme though, it honestly felt kind of out of character when you consider it's his theme. It's a very humble tune, which is the complete opposite of the character himself. It feels like there was some sort of translation error when talking to the music team or something, like somebody accidentally said he's a charming bird instead of he's an asshole bird. Or as if somebody was like, do we have a theme ready for Revali? No sir, but we have this pretty nice Elder theme. Fine, that'll do. We ship next week.
Oh, you must pardon me. I forgot you have no way of making it up to that divine beast on your own.
Mipha's theme was actually really good. It carried with it an aspect of sadness and delicacy, and just really set the tone of her character. Happy to support from the sidelines, even being subjected to the not-so-nice fate of being a spooky ghost. As for Daruk, his theme is almost completely recycled from the trailer, which is rather strange considering I didn't hear any of that in the other champion themes unless I'm just deaf or something. But I'll get back to Daruk when we actually get to the dedicated discussion on leitmotifs. As for the companions, Teba's theme is literally only 20 seconds. What the heck? It uses the same leitmotif as Revali's theme, but it really feels like Revali's theme was created for Teba, and then they were like, this doesn't really fit Revali, but let's shoehorn it in anyway so we can get some leitmotif stuff going. Riju also plays off of Urbosa's theme. At least this one actually works for them both. Yunobo's theme is just like, you know what guys, let's make a character the player can hate. And hate him I did. Unlike the other two, this doesn't really seem to play off of Daruk's theme from what I can tell, which, again, was just reusing themes from the trailers. Interesting at least how the first two attempted to play off of one another between the companion and the champion equivalent. Emphasis on attempted for Teba and Revali with how out of character it feels for the latter. But it really feels like there wasn't anything all that enjoyable about any of these companion
Up top! Above you!
Pardon the entrance, but you're a Hylian, aren't you? I was hoping perhaps you'd have a moment to talk.
Sidon's theme is absolutely incredible. And just so perfectly captures his character, I feel. Honestly, one of the best themes in the game. Like the first two, this one also gets inspiration from the equivalent champion theme if you listen closely. But then it makes me really wonder, what the heck is up with this weird inconsistency? 3 of the champion companion pairs have leitmotif musical connections to one another, but none for Yunobo and Daruk? Am I just deaf and can't hear it? Or were the developers really just like, you know what? Fuck Yunobo, am I right, guys? Breath of the Wild does have some jammers in there, but there's just this weird inconsistency when it comes to so much of the music that it really sometimes makes me wonder what they were even smoking over there in the studios. Whether it be the Talus theme saying, I'm an absolute jammer. Ha! No I'm not! Get pranked, nerd! Look, there's the camera! Molduga's theme being like, I get good, but you probably won't be around after the next 3,000 years to hear that part anyway. Shrine Battle theme being like, yeah, boing! Making a theme that fits Teba, but not really Revali, but just using it for both of them anyway, even though they weren't going for leitmotif connections between all of the champion companion pairs anyway. Or the developers deciding they want to use leitmotif connections between the champions and the companions, but by the time they got to Yunobo and Daruk, they were just like, you know what? Fuck that shit, that idea's stupid. Let's make Yunobo stupid and recycle trailer music for Daruk. It's like they ran out of time and panicked or something. Like, if they didn't bother going through with leitmotif connections for all 4 character sets anyway, why wouldn't they even bother just giving Revali's theme directly to Teba to have, and creating a new theme for Revali that fits him better if you're not committing to champion and companion musical connections anyway? It really does feel like this game is just fighting itself a lot of the time. The dungeon themes. First off, the four divine beasts. Their music was kinda like, well, things sure have gone to shit here, but not really much else. It really felt like one of those situations where it was settled to just go for what works rather than taking the soundtrack further, just settling for what's par. Like, imagine if these divine beast themes had an aspect of sadness to them, like a reminder. Remember what they once were? Look at what's become of it now. I feel like a lot of the soundtrack just settles for being fitting enough without having the courage to try anything spicier. The final dungeon of the game, Hyrule Castle, or, also the first dungeon depending on how you play. This theme is praised as one of the shiny examples of the Breath of the Wild soundtrack, I feel like, but I'm not actually certain why, honestly. It gives a feeling of foreboding, like you're up against this menacing, evil-ridden castle, but that's all it does. It doesn't take it any further. Like, why doesn't it have an aspect of sadness to it that the player should ideally feel through the music? A sadness at what has happened to this place. This once great kingdom, fallen and brought to ruin. There's no aspect in the music of, what has happened here? How could this have happened? There's no aspect of epicness, like this is the finale of your journey and you're approaching the strongest foe who threatens all of Hyrule. Sure, Hyrule Castle theme fits what it needs to as a foreboding evil castle looming over you, but that's just its job as a soundtrack. It didn't bother to do anything extra. I feel like one of the reasons this theme is praised so highly is because of the blandness of, say, the Divine Beast themes, or a lot of the other Zelda dungeon themes, honestly. Yeah, it does fit what feeling it has to better than those. I don't think that means it did an exceptional job. I just feel like Hyrule Castle's theme did its job, and that's it. And that it appears much better than it is because it's compared to things that are below average soundtrack-wise, I'd argue. Like, the Divine Beast themes are kinda eh, and I feel like previous Zelda dungeon themes kinda blend together and are forgettable, with some exceptions like some of the Link's Awakening dungeons, for example. There's some serious jammers in there. What are some examples of Final Dungeon approaching the end themes that actually do take it further, though? Take Xenoblade Chronicles, for example. The final dungeon theme of this game not only feels like there's a foreboding challenge looming ahead of you like Hyrule Castle, but also feels like this is the culmination of your adventure. Prepare for the epic finale as you prep yourself to face the final boss. As well, it takes the time to become calmer, sadder, to take a moment to reflect on the fact that everything really has gone to shit, and that this is the character's final chance at making a change. After this brief break, it comes right back into the epicness. Hard. Just imagine listening to something like this as you trek through Hyrule Castle and prepare to face off against Ganon. Or take another final area theme, Astral Chain. This one also makes sure to have an epic approaching the end sort of feel, but this one has a greater emphasis on the sadness aspect than Hyrule Castle and Approaching the End in Xenoblade Chronicles do. It says, look at what this place has become. How could this have happened? What happened here? Go uncover the dark truth. You are our last hope. I'd also like to draw attention to Octopath Traveler's final area theme, known as the Gate of Finis. You cannot leave this place once you've entered. The true final boss lies at the end. If you're here, either you defeat him or die trying. To reach the final boss, you must defeat shadowy versions of past foes, after each of which you learn more about the lore of this world, some of which becomes rather dark. This is the final set of trials, and along the way you uncover the dark truth of the world you have existed in all this time. These 8 separate stories, they've been connected all along, and it's all been building up to this end. The music, it brings in a sense of not just foreboding for the end, it feels like you are uncovering dark mysteries, and the music expresses the sadness and now knowing the dark history that has led up to this point. You're putting little bits of disconnected lore together, figuring out how it all makes sense in the big picture, as the picture in your mind gets clearer and clearer as you trek through the Gate of Finis. The background part of the music with the repeated tune, it sounds fragmented by the way it goes up the notes before suddenly hopping down again, but despite the fragmented feel, it still comes together to form a coherent and downright ominous tune. The background tune seems like something that would have no rhyme or reason to it, but works out all the same. While in the foreground, you've typically only got a few notes playing at a time, with these pauses in between, as if you're only getting part of the music at a time. Like the background, it is fragmented, albeit in a different way. All in all, this theme is not all that dissimilar from how you as the player are receiving fragmented bits of lore, meaningless on their own, but together form not only a coherent, but rather dark and ominous picture of the world this game takes place in. These are examples of OST that go above and beyond, that attempt not to settle on something just good enough, something just fitting enough for the area. Making a soundtrack that only fits the area is just part of a game's job. When it does that, it's what I call par. Taking that further means consideration of how should this music make the player feel? What emotions should it draw out? What emotions are the characters in the story feeling at this moment, that we can utilize the music to make the player feel in turn as well? Yes, Hyrule Castle fits the area, but I'd argue it doesn't attempt to connect with the player on an emotional level. If I had to name the emotions that should be felt in this time, sure, there's the obvious of what it actually went for if you're facing a big evil-ridden castle, but I'd also expect there to be feelings of sadness for what kind of terrible fate fell this once great kingdom. What could the people of Hyrule have done to deserve such a thing? How could it have been left to fall to such a ruin? And I would also expect a feeling that expresses that you're approaching the end, that it's now or never, that this is the true trial to save Hyrule. Hyrule Castle's theme just doesn't do that. It's just like, hey, I'm an evil-ridden massive-ass castle. Yes, it fits what it was supposed to at the minimum, but it's just such wasted potential for if they had actually decided to take this theme farther, to draw out emotions in the player that I feel are must-haves to create the best soundtrack you can, which in the case of Breath of the Wild's Hyrule Castle is the feelings of approaching the end, and of sadness for the fate of Hyrule while Link slumbered the past 100 years. This can also be applied to my discontentment with the overworld themes. They were fitting enough for what they had to be, but I feel like they couldn't make that emotional connection that makes a fictional world real. Calamity Ganon, the foe you've been preparing during the entire time you're in Hyrule for, whether that time be 30 hours or 30 minutes. You start the fight, and the final boss music is... well, basically it's like, hey, you're fighting a big bad. No epic conclusion or anything like that thrown in. Just, here's an evil dude in front of you, fuck him up. This is just the first phase, though. First 2 phases? Because halfway through fighting him, he becomes hella pissed and is now like, counter me or die! After Calamity Ganon has been defeated, you now face Dark Beast Ganon, an evil so dark that it is rendered as null Ganon's ability to aim his literal only attack. It starts out as you're facing a big bad, best watch out, and then it just explodes into a full orchestra that's meant to signify the culmination of your adventure. That's the right idea for what you should do in creating the best final boss theme you can. Heck, this theme even pulls off a key change later on, which is an awesome way to bring your final boss theme up in intensity for free partway through. It's like, oh shit, I thought it was for real before, but now it's really for real. A well-executed key change like this one really does incredible work in making the experience just feel completely epic, for lack of a better word. But I have a few massive problems with this final boss theme that really prevents it from shining through for me. I have 3 main problems with this theme. One is directly about the theme, one is about the theme with reference to the actual final boss, and the last is how the theme relates to the rest of the game. Let's go in order, shall we? Let's start with the problem I have with the theme itself. My problem with the theme itself is the piano in the background. Let's face it, the foreground part of this theme is legendary. The way the orchestra just comes together with this epic finale of a theme, it really is breathtaking. Or at least it would be, if there wasn't some dude having a seizure on the piano in the background. If you listen close, there are times the background piano literally isn't even in time with the foreground orchestra. Like, how do you mess up that hard? I understand the desire to have a background bit that sounds random, sporadic, like you're facing off against this complete mess of malice and hate that seeks to bring ruin to the world. But there exist ways to have that feeling of random, sporadic, or even fragmented music. Listen back to the Gate of Finis example from Octopath Traveler earlier. Sure, it's a very different theme, since it goes for ominous, and Breath of the Wild's final boss theme goes for the feel of epic finale, but I feel like it can still illustrate my example of having that random fragmented feel to a musical theme. The background theme goes up the notes before rapidly jumping down again, or even taking some breaks here and there, to give that feeling of random and fragmented, but despite that, it doesn't stray too far from the foreground themes. But Breath of the Wild going for this wild, sporadic feel, it's not even in time with the foreground orchestra. The way I see the piano in the background, it's just a massive distraction. It takes away from the masterpiece that is the foreground orchestra by having some piano player in the corner of the room being like, I want attention, I can play keys too. It's like somebody brought their kid into work that day and was like, mash your face against this controller the way a Yoshi main mashes their face against their GameCube controller. Like, honestly, what even is the story behind this piano bit anyway? I'm honestly actually a bit concerned for the health of whoever was in charge of piano on this orchestra. Or did somebody just sneak it in being like, aha! Nobody will notice some crazy piano mashing I found online. The way I see it, this piano really prevents me from enjoying this theme to its full potential. This theme would be better off countless times over if that piano in the background was just deleted, focusing on the masterful foreground instead of forcing in a background that just doesn't work for the sake of having any background theme at all. That's the thing about what's in the background for musical themes. If you can pull it off and it works, go for it. The music will be way better off for it. But if you can't pull it off, don't force something in that doesn't fit, because it just makes the whole thing fall apart. Now for my second problem, how this theme actually relates to the final boss. Listening to this theme, while suppressing the piano in my head as best I can at least, it just exudes the vibes of a completely epic finale. But then you face the actual final boss. He just bumbles around like an idiot while occasionally shooting a laser in a straight line ahead of him as his only attack. You need to be either blind or clueless to ever be hit by this attack. It serves no challenge whatsoever. And it takes away so much of the epic feeling that the final boss theme would otherwise provide by making you wait just so long. Like, after taking out the second set of targets, I literally just wait for 33 seconds before I can attack him again as another target appears. This final boss is almost completely waiting around while moving at least the 1 km/h required to dodge his one attack. It's the complete opposite of an epic finale. The music, apart from the piano guy, is like, here's this absolutely epic finale to close out your grand adventure, and the gameplay is like, red light, green light, red light. Red light. Red light. Red light. Red light. Green light. Red light. And all you do during the brief time you even get to play the video game is basically break the targets.
Ready? Go!
The mood of the music and the actual gameplay in front of you just don't agree with each other. Wait, aspects not agreeing with one another. Ludonarrative dissonance is when the game's story and gameplay seem to disagree with one another, like a character doing something in gameplay that goes against their character in the story. Ludo comes from ludology, the study of games. Narrative is for the story being told, and dissonance for what difference there exists. Does that mean that this final boss theme has ludo-harmonic dissonance? Is that a term? Let's roll with it anyway. The final boss theme does not agree with the gameplay of the final boss. While the music describes a completely epic finale, the gameplay showcases well, a big pig who can't aim, who you have to wait intervals of over half a minute between times you can shoot him a few times. And thus, the final boss of Breath of the Wild suffers from ludoharmonic dissonance, a disagreement between the music and the gameplay. The aspect where the fault lies is in the gameplay. Apart from the piano guy having an aneurysm, the music was right in its focus on creating an absolutely epic finale. A final boss should feel like that. It's like in developing the final boss, somebody was like, alright, we need an absolutely epic finale. What have you all come up with? And the music department, everybody's super excited and are like, okay, we've thrown together something really special for you that should make an absolutely epic finale. Except for the one piano playing guy in the back with his head down and an expression of, what the fuck have I done? And then in the gameplay department, they're like, oh shit, you wanted epic? We thought you said derpy. Well, we figured out how to make him shoot a laser. And now my final problem with the final boss theme, how it relates to the rest of the soundtrack. But to understand that, first we need to have that discussion on leitmotifs. Leitmotifs are a recurring tune throughout a soundtrack, typically played in different styles to draw different emotions out of the player. Along with key changes, I would argue leitmotifs are one of the key ways to really enhance a soundtrack. By playing a theme you've heard previously in the adventure but in a new style, it gives the feeling of familiarity, but yet it's different somehow. This is still familiar, it's still the same adventure, but things have changed. Let's look at the Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Explorers titles for an excellent example of the use of this. As I'm talking about the music of this game, if you haven't played it yet, please just look away for spoiler reasons, listen to this video in another tab or something, because the Explorers games really are an absolutely incredible experience to have. These games use a few leitmotifs, some of which are actually recurring tunes from the Mystery Dungeon series itself, but the most prevalent leitmotif for the Explorers set of games is this one. This tune is used throughout the entire story, whether it be used to simulate mystery, sadness, adventure, approaching the end, or an epic finale. And it's not just one leitmotif that themes in this game have in common. Take the following tune for instance. Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Time, Darkness, and Sky has to be some of the most fascinating games in terms of the musical strategies taken throughout the soundtrack, such as the prevalent use of leitmotifs. These leitmotifs instill a feeling that this is still the same adventure, but now due to your actions, things have completely changed. These strategies of leitmotif use is something that has stuck around throughout the entire Pokemon Mystery Dungeon series. Let's look at another example of leitmotif usage in video games, this time with Xenoblade Chronicles 2. We first hear this fast-paced, rapid back-and-forth tune during Counterattack, one of the themes used for the most high-stakes cutscenes of the game. Within the same theme, it also later goes through a key change by playing the same 3 notes that led up to this main tune before suddenly cutting, playing the same intro tune in a different key, and coming back hard with a tune in a new key. This key change also goes directly hand in hand with the cutscenes of the game, and the name of the theme, Counterattack, with the original key representing how the battle was going, and the new key representing the way the battle's going now.
Things are heating up!
Let's do it!
What is this?
It's called Foresight.
I don't...
A prediction of what will happen in the immediate future. Read their movements to find an opening, then counter.
I get it. How did he dodge that?
This theme is also then used in later cutscenes in other styles, to draw out emotions such as sadness.
It's okay, you two. I don't care who cooks. I'm just happy with... I'm happy with...
Rex.
And then later used to create an absolutely epic finale. In both the example of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon and Xenoblade Chronicles 2, the use of leitmotifs in the final boss creates a reminder of your adventure up to that point, the feeling that this truly is the culmination of all your efforts, the epic finale of your adventure. Generally, when using a leitmotif in the final boss theme, this is the feeling games aim to capture. Leitmotifs truly are one of the key ingredients in transforming a good soundtrack into a masterful soundtrack. Whether it be using leitmotifs to symbolize the adventure up to this point, to symbolize the characters coming together for one final battle, or various other forms of symbolism leitmotifs can pull off, a leitmotif in a final boss should really draw out the feeling in the player that this is the finale. This is the culmination of their efforts. This is what it all comes down to. Breath of the Wild's final boss theme uses a leitmotif. Sort of. To be an effective leitmotif, well, you actually need to be used in multiple places. It kinda comes with the definition. But what everybody typically knows this theme as is the trailer theme. Not a theme in game, but the trailer theme. It technically exists in small parts in some scenes of the game, namely some of the memory cutscenes, or say the intro to Rito Village. So rather than this leitmotif coming from various stages of your adventure up to this point, such as in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon or Xenoblade Chronicles 2, this leitmotif instead represents several very short scenes that come from essentially glorified side quests due to the open world nature of this game. This leitmotif does not at all represent your journey. It is not something that has come along throughout your time in this world. Throughout all of Breath of the Wild, apart from the final boss theme, the most recognized place for this tune is in the trailers. So what kind of feelings is this leitmotif then supposed to evoke anyway? Man, those trailers sure were kick-ass. Instead of being a reminder of your adventure up to this point, it's a reminder of the trailers. And for anybody who hasn't seen the trailers, this tune becomes next to meaningless as a leitmotif. I mentioned that my final complaint about the final boss theme was how it relates to the rest of the game, so this criticism isn't so much about the final boss theme itself, rather it's about the lack of a presence of this leitmotif throughout the adventure, essentially rendering this leitmotif, when used in the final boss theme, pointless. I just wish we could have had a firmer presence for these themes throughout the journey, to really give the final boss validation as the conclusion of the journey. Why couldn't we have had any of this epic trailer music for some intense battles along the way, instead of the mediocre battle themes we got? Like, what about the Blight themes? Just imagine fighting the Blights with music that epic. It would really help make the Blights feel less underwhelming by having an epic score to back them, instead of just, you're fighting a big bad. If it was used during at least the Blights, then having it again during the final boss theme would make it actually feel like this is the culmination of all your trials. All of these strong boss foes you faced up to this point, this one is the final one, with strength far greater than any of the others. But no, they didn't bother to do anything like that. Or take the color parts of the trailer theme. Why can't things like that exist as you're exploring the world, to breathe life into it, to make the experience real? Heck, they could have even put the trailer themes over top of the title screen if they had to, so at least that way the final boss leitmotif wouldn't be pointless because it only really represents a trailer rather than the actual adventure, and people who've never seen the trailer could at least then be like, hey, wait a second, I recognize that tune, once they reach the finale. But no, they couldn't even be bothered to put something like that over an already silent title screen. Yeah, sure, it's better off being mute. To sum up my arguments on the music, Breath of the Wild does have some good music in there. Some are straight up jammers, Some draw inspiration and nostalgia from past entries. Some perfectly represent what they aim for, while others had the right idea but fell short of their full potential for various reasons. A lot of the soundtrack, though, just kind of felt like a mess. Whether it be themes that can't decide on what they want to be, themes that take too long before actually being jammers, themes that throw in insanely questionable additions that just detract from the overall feel, or themes that kinda want to use a leitmotif, but just can't be bothered to actually make it a leitmotif throughout the journey. And there's so many themes where I feel like they just fit what they need to well enough, but don't take it anywhere further. They don't bring the world alive emotionally, settling for themes that represent the basic feeling of the area instead of going further by bringing alive both the environment and the emotions the characters would feel by being here within this world. They don't bring the world alive emotionally, settling for themes that represent the basic feel of the area, instead of going further by bringing alive both the environment and the emotions the characters would feel by being here within this world.